This is TehachaPod. Welcome. Sit back and relax as Key Budge and Corey Costello talk about things that are happening in and around Tehachapi. Now it's time for Key and Corey.
Well, Corey, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for doing this again. I'm excited about a cool, event that started right here in Tehachapi, which is international now.
It is very cool. It's International Podcast Day. September 30th is the day. And this is going to be the 5th annual.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. And Steve Lee and Dave Lee, they are the co-founders of International Podcast Day. So we're going to get a chance to talk to them in a few minutes. Pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they also host their own podcast about technology. And we're using new technology today. As before I recorded, I had to hit record like 3 times just because I'm getting used to some of the new tech that we're using here for TehachaPod. I think this will be an interesting conversation because for me, it's about Tehachapi, right? And this is something that's being done on a global basis.
Yeah, and it's been, podcasting probably hitting the 15-year mark probably these days. I know I was into it very early in the game when it was like 2005, and someone actually approached me and said, "You should do a podcast." And I said, "What?" And then they explained it, right? It was a broadcast for an iPod at the time. That's where podcast came from.
Right.
And you're right, like the technology that's just evolved since then to now. I mean, we've got this basically podcast machine that we can speak into, when before it was all come up with some kind of crazy recording and plug it into a computer and maybe have digital software and maybe not, and now it's pretty plug and play, as they say.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that we can do. I got into podcasting a little over 5 years ago with Steve Lee, and co-hosted a few shows with him and got my feet wet. Different than radio, but very, very similar.
Yeah. I had a cool one years ago. It actually kind of stemmed off a radio show I was doing, and it centered around stock car racing, NASCAR essentially. But it was focused everything from like your national stuff, because I had a local show that focused on the local stuff, Bakersfield, and then in Kern County, and then we kind of took it to another level and did kind of the national stuff. But we also paid a lot of attention to the regional series around the country. That got different drivers, that got different race organizers and organizations that you probably never heard of listening to the show. It was a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends and just kind of learned about the stock car racing world across the country. It was really cool. Got to go and cover some events and meet some people. It was a good time.
Before we go over and talk with Steve and Dave, the Lees, we want to let's go ahead and hear what the promo is for International Podcast Day.
International Podcast Day is September 30th, and you can help spread the word. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved? It's pretty simple. Head over to internationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. Then use hashtag International Podcast Day to join the conversation. You can reach out and connect with other podcasters, listeners, and your favorite podcast hosts. Remember September 30th, International Podcast Day, a day-long celebration of the power of podcasts.
You're listening to TehachaPod with Key Budge and Corey Costello.
So we're back here with TehachaPod. And we just came out of listening to International Podcast Day promo, Corey, September 30th. And then with us, we've got the 2 co-founders, Steve Lee and Dave Lee. Guys, welcome to the show. We appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be involved with TehachaPod.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
Let's talk about podcasting. Corey and I were talking about podcasting's been around that we know 15 years. You guys will probably know much more of the history. Corey goes back to, that's about when he had his first podcast was about 15 years ago.
Yeah, so the reason for International Podcast Day is that we actually started it in September of 2014, was sort of a 10-year anniversary of the beginning of podcasting. Okay, yeah. So the best records show that in September of 2004 is when the first podcast was released. And so, I'm not sure exactly what that means. Maybe it's a 16-year, 17-year now. But yeah, September 2004 is the essentially the launch of podcasting.
It's amazing. And you guys have been podcasting. I know, Steve, you've been podcasting for about that long yourself. You've been right one of the when it all began, you were right digging into the trenches.
Pretty much just shortly after podcasting really became a thing. And Dave's been doing the tech show that we do with me ever since. It's remarkable how far he's come from a technology knowledge perspective. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of how it all started. And Podcasting used to be a word that nobody knew. Right. It was like the infancy of the internet. Nobody knew what that funny looking symbol was for email and those kinds of things. So the progression has been remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually working in radio when I actually started my first podcast as kind of a side gig and sort of extend upon what I was doing on radio. And in radio, it really wasn't a thing yet. And now I think we've really seen it shift. I think the most powerful broadcasters in America now are podcasters. They are not necessarily your Rush Limbaughs or your Howard Sterns. It's your Joe Rogans, and go down the list of your powerful podcasters now. Our listening habits have changed. So in that short period of time, we've really seen podcasting kind of flip the script on media in general.
I think that's a fair assessment. And take it from the podcast guy, I had to switch my audio because I had it set up wrong. So podcasting is still a craft, even though 15 years in the making. We're still learning things as we go with all these new platforms and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely something that has taken a life of its own. We have seen these massive waves, right, and increases in consumption. And you can literally point to every year since 2004 when podcasts launched, you have seen an incremental increase year after year, not only in the number of podcasts being produced, the number of podcasters sharing their shows, but also the listening consumption. And so, as you mentioned, Corey, you could have the big conglomerates, even the big broadcast medias, the NPR, Joe Rogans, that are putting out their content week after week, getting millions of downloads. You have just as many independent podcasters out there doing that, getting anywhere from 500 to 2,000 to 10,000 downloads per episode. And the consumption behind this media, because it is so popular, because it is so flexible, it is on demand, you have just seen constant incremental growth over 15, 16 years.
The audience, the consumer, is changing, evolving, and understanding and embracing technology. And I know myself also having that terrestrial radio background, podcasting was, it was never going to be a competitor.
Yeah, right.
Now, I tell you what, radio is in fear of podcasting, and if they need to change the way they do business, because podcasting is taking their audience. Because we'd rather listen to something that is specific for us, and that's the beautiful thing about podcasting. At least in the way I look at it is, man, we're able to talk about things and talk directly to people who want to hear those topics.
There's a couple of things that have really changed that landscape. Number one is mobile. The phone has really changed so many things in so many facets in regards to technology. But with podcasting, you now have a mobile player. The other thing is nowadays, not when we started, but nowadays, the ease of podcasting is much easier. There's a lot of automation and a lot of tools to assist with that. And I think the other thing is versus terrestrial, is that terrestrial, I have to know when and where at a certain time in a certain dial or whatever to go get you. I don't have to do that with podcasting. It is on my phone for whenever I want to get it.
Right.
I think that's and that term was brought up, on demand. I think Key mentioned that, and that's kind of how we consume all of our media now. I don't have a regular cable subscription for TV. So I don't know what time something's on anymore. I just set up what I like, and then when I go to my homepage, whether it's Hulu or Roku, it's there for me. Oh, your new show is on, and so and the same with Netflix and Amazon Video, that kind of stuff. We're not in that time slot mentality anymore as we used to be.
Yeah, and we can even add to that conversation that infotainment centers within vehicles really changed the landscape too. Because for those that didn't have mobile devices or didn't want to pay the $500-$600 to have one, they were able to now get these inside of these new vehicles. Also, very underrepresented as far as discussion when it comes to consumption of podcasts is all these smart devices in your home, whether you're using an Alexa, you're using Google Home, any of these other products. You're now being able to cook in the kitchen while playing it on one of your Echo shows, or you're able to use it through your Google Home, and you're now starting to stream to your TVs as well. And so the array and variety in which people can consume, whether it's at the gym, cooking, on the road, at work, wherever it may be, you can get your podcast from so many different angles. And I think that's another advantageous sort of thing to discuss when it comes to consumption of podcasts.
Key had brought up the technology piece, and actually I believe Steve, you brought up the technology piece of how easy it is now, so to speak. And Key and I were laughing because when we first started TehachaPod, it was like we used our radio background to put together this Frankenstein of a setup, cables and adapters everywhere, and it was it was something you looked like you wanted to actually diffuse as opposed to actually broadcast from. But it worked for the first few episodes, and then now we're shout out Rodecaster Pro. I mean, it's plug and play. We just plug in and we have everything is right inside of this little deal now, and as opposed to where we were when we started, and that was just earlier this year. And I remember my first few shows 15 years ago were kind of a Frankenstein setup at my house. So it is crazy how easy it's become for anybody to be able to podcast now at a pretty affordable price.
Well, you should have called me. I wouldn't have charged you guys to help you out.
Oh, it worked.
I know
believe
that,
me, it
true.
worked. It worked well, actually.
Yeah.
It was just, it looked like a Frankenstein crew, but now we're slim and sleek.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day, we had to write our own RSS feeds by hand.
I remember that. Yeah.
When I came over to the city in 2016, podcasting was something that I had pitched as a part of when I interviewed, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting." I go, "No, this is the future of getting information to the public. We need to look at this, embrace it, and as a government agency, we have a responsibility to make sure we're getting information to our, our audience, which is the people that live here." And this was one of those ways I thought we could do it. So it's taken us a few years, and we started off with just using a Zoom digital recorder to record some content, and then we go back in and start to edit. And then all of a sudden it was like we started to see an audience, we've got a following, and we go, okay, now we know that we were able to show with the analytics that people are paying attention, and the podcasting here in Tehachapi, is, it's obviously not new with what you guys have been doing for years, but it was something that the people here, they wanted the information and they were ready to consume it. Looking at our analytics, we actually see that TehachaPod is being consumed globally. So we start seeing our downloads internationally, which was fascinating for us, which kind of, and I saw that there were some military bases, U.S. military bases in those regions. So I go, we've got some men and women that are serving in the military that are probably getting a little taste of back home. It was like we were able to bring some of that. To me, it's just amazing what we're able to do.
Yeah, well, shadow that. It's exceptional that you have people that either were born in Tehachapi, that moved away, that visited or only lived here for a few years. They are still interested in their hometown or where they visited. Or I even know people that simply do podcasts and they just talk about, I know listeners that go through and listen to travel podcasts just to figure out where these little towns are. And that offshoots like, hey, well, I heard about Tehachapi somewhere. Let me see if they have a podcast. And so really it's limitless. Like you said, there are no boundaries with podcasting. There are no state boundaries. There are no national boundaries. It's a global audience. And like you said, you can reach every corner of the earth and somebody's going to be interested in what you're saying because there's always a connection to the city you either worked, lived, or visited.
I had a coworker one time when I was actually working at Cal State Bakersfield years ago. He was our strength and conditioning coach, and he was listening to something one day, and I said, "Oh, what do you got there?" He goes, "I'm listening to a podcast out of Germany about ACL injuries and ACL injury treatment and rehab." And I was like, "Okay, that's fairly random." But there was a podcast about treatment of ACL injuries from a guy who had some kind of experimental treatment in Germany, and that was the podcast.
Absolutely.
And I know, Steve, you and I, you invited me to come in and sit down with you for a couple of episodes of Tehachapi Mountain Voice, and that was a blast. But I know that you looked at the power of podcasting, and I'm sure, is that where National Podcast Day came, which evolved to International Podcast Day?
It's a very interesting question. And to really answer that, let's go back just a couple of years when, there's been this kind of a sine wave with podcasting, some of the ups and downs. And then a few years ago, we started seeing a lot of the bigger media coming into the space and a lot of the celebrities. And as we know, sometimes that really changes the face of an industry or a hobby or whatever the case may be. And as you know, Key, I ran an entire podcast network where I had people from all over the country that were on my platform. And what transpired was it was 2013. I was on my way to LA. and I heard a commercial. Funny, I was listening to terrestrial radio because I ran out of podcasts to listen to. How stupid of me. But I heard a commercial for National Senior Citizens Day. And I thought, and I go, podcasting is really becoming a mainstream thing. Why don't we have a national celebration of the art and the craft that we love? It's not a conference. It's not a lot of these things. It's a celebration. It's a birthday party. It's a way to reach out and touch people and say, hey, if you've never heard of podcasting, here's what it is. Here's what you can listen to. If you're interested in being a podcaster, you can do that too. And so we set out initially with National Podcast Day and had our first one in 2014. And we got so much feedback on, why aren't you doing this internationally? Because podcasting is. We rebranded and went that way. Dave can talk more to the numbers, but since it has become a life of its own, people all over the world are joining this movement, this behavior. I was just talking to a lady yesterday that last year she took cupcakes to work with the International Podcast Day logo on them and gave them away. We have people that do podcast pub crawls. You name it, people are getting involved, and it's a remarkable thing. We do a 30-hour live stream of with podcasters all across the globe in their native language. And it's become just an amazing form of just pulling the world together around a single industry called podcast.
How can we listen to that 30 hours? If I want to tune in and catch someone from Belgium or Australia, where do we want to send folks so they can tune in and download, or is it a live stream?
Yeah, it is a live stream. You can actually just head over to internationalpodcastday.com and you can bookmark that on the day between September 29th and 30th. We will be live broadcasting. As we mentioned, we're going to do 24 hours. And this year, guys, excited to announce that we have 60 podcasters and we're going to be representing 26 different countries. And I mean, we're talking about anything from Costa Rica to Malaysia, India, Kenya, Portugal. We have podcasters from Serbia, Italy, Japan, France, Zambia, Turkey, Argentina, Colombia, New Zealand, Egypt. I mean, I can keep going down the list, gentlemen, but that is sort of the scope of what we've done this year. And we do have a couple sessions in Spanish. We're going to have a session in Turkish. We're going to have a session in Japanese as well. And that's truly what we want to bring here, is we bring all these different independent voices from around the world, right? Give them an opportunity to share their experience. And it could, in every session, in each little hour broadcast is going to be different. It's going to be tailored, one towards the podcaster itself. One will be about the industry. One will be about how people have become fans of, say, a show and have now become creators of a podcast. So sort of this podcast transition into fandom, or fandom into podcasting kind of thing. So it's pretty incredible what we've seen. And I think over rough calculations in my head, over this will be our 7th year. We feature nearly 250 podcasters from about 75 different countries. And so again, as Steve said, it has taken a life of its own. We are finding individuals that are doing podcast festivals. They're doing live broadcasts. They're doing giveaways. There are endless types of things. We even have listeners meeting up with listeners of their most favorite shows to kind of hang out and chat about what they love. And so it's really an endless day of celebration. And we are just very pleased to play a little small part of that with our live broadcast.
I could add one thing. Every year we trend #1 on all social media platforms with our hashtag, which is just unbelievable. But second to that, a part of the schedule this year is we are going to have Adam Curry on, who is the former V-jockey on MTV who invented podcasting. He is going to be on and he's going to talk about the history of podcasting. And then the next hour, we're going to follow that up with the International Podcast Awards.
The Podfather, as he's known, will be on.
Absolutely.
And then don't forget Tehachapi, okay? Because I know you guys are going to be a part. So we talk about all these cool international places globally and Tehachapi.
That's right. From Turkey to Tehachapi.
From Turkey. The center of the universe.
There you go. Exactly.
It is very interesting. We get questioned a lot about, where are you doing this out of? Chicago, New York, what?
Right.
No, it's in my office in Tehachapi, California. Taha what? Well, it shows with the technology, with the breadth of the internet, and what you can do with a little bit of vision to take something extremely wide from wherever you're at.
It's exciting.
For sure.
I think so kudos to you guys. I mean, this is a major undertaking. I know it. And just listening to you guys and the coordination efforts and making sure everything runs smooth, it's beyond my capability. So I really appreciate it because, Steve, you're the guy I'm going to look to call when I have a problem. And you're able to just mask right through these things. So it's amazing the level of what you're able to do on a global basis from right here in your office here in Tehachapi.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to organize. It's definitely cool. I'm, for one, just super appreciative of the podcast and podcasting community in general, because if they didn't embrace this day, if this movement, we would have just celebrated National Podcast Day for the first time in 2014, done a small little 6-hour session and just been done with it. But they fully embraced it. I mean, the next year in 2015, we went 35 straight hours and started over in New Zealand and Australia and just circled the globe. And we've done that every year since. And just a massive thank you and shout out to the community, because the podcasting community itself has given Steve and I so much. We have been able to travel. We've been able to present at different conferences, both virtually and in person. We have been to the East and the West Coast, and without their supports, this day would not, because they give me the fuel, they give me the energy to get through that entire 30-hour live stream. And it's just incredible to just give back a little bit to what a community has given so much to us for.
It's awesome. And you, a couple things to promote. Obviously your podcast, thewavesofTech.com. Folks can check that out. And then again, internationalpodcastday.com are the two URLs that are important to remember here.
Exactly. If you want to listen live, that's where you want to go. What are some of the other social medias where you guys at? I know I've seen you guys on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, we're, again, head over to internationalpodcastday.com. We have widgets in the top right corner for our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and we also have a YouTube channel where we host all of our live events, our broadcasts will be hosted. And then you can even check back all the way back, I believe, to 2016. We have all of our presentations there. So yeah, if you just type in International Podcast Day into any sort of social media application, you're going to be able to find us there.
Tell us a little bit before we got to go about Waves of Tech, because that goes back 14, 15 years.
The Waves of Tech is kind of interesting. A number of years ago when I was up in Northern California working, I wanted to communicate with my sons. So we would get on Skype and we would chit-chat about whatever. And me and one of my other sons are involved in technology. And so inevitably the conversation was always tech. One day I recorded it and then I said, hey guys, heard about this thing called podcasting. You want to do it? And I actually released that as our first episode back in the day. And we are at, I don't know, Dave, we just released 505 today.
Yep.
I believe. So it's been a wonderful journey. It's about technology and how it relates or affects your life, impacts it. And we cover pretty much all gamut. It's not about ones and zeros. It's about what's important to us, whether good, bad, or indifferent with technology in our lives.
Yeah, I call it a tech grab bag show. Each week, Steve and I kind of dissect 3-4 different topics, and we're talking about the entire spectrum of technology. So we cover business, we cover media, healthcare, government, space, security, education, social media, privacy, e-commerce, aeronautics, like you name whatever touches technology, which in 2020, let's be honest, touches everything. And so we really have an opportunity to really explore every angle of technology. And yeah, it's been a fun ride. I think we launched our first podcast March 1st, 2007. And so we celebrate our 13th anniversary 6 months ago. But yeah, 505 episodes in. Again, great to be a part of a great technology community and a lot of great tech podcasters out there. We're happy to just have a small fraction of that.
That's amazing.
Cool.
We're on, you guys are going to be featured in episode 34.
Hey,
there is nothing
episode
wrong
by
with
episode.
That.
That's right.
We've been trying to do it every week and making sure that we're getting information out to the community. So we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
And our following keeps growing. But we may not be the original podcast of Tehachapi. We call ourselves the official podcast of the city of Tehachapi.
That's right.
But you guys are the OGs here in the podcasting in Tehachapi. So we give you that credit and acknowledgement. So anything else you guys want to touch on before we let you go? I know we're running up on some time issues. So
I'd like to mention just one thing besides the great work you're doing at the city with getting information out to people. Whether we as community members agree or disagree with what's going on, it doesn't matter. It's about providing the information. And I think so many areas across the country are missing out because they're not feeding their populace information to make their own decisions or to be informed. Lastly, if you go over to International Podcast Day, people always want to know, Podcast Day is on September 30th. Why are you starting on the 29th? We always start our stream on the evening of the 29th here because it's already September 30th in New Zealand. And then we start our progression around the world. So when you look at the schedule, don't get too confused. It's really kind of nuts and how it all makes sense.
So it's the 30th somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
Love that.
Yeah, I definitely encourage everybody. I do want to highlight real briefly the speakers that we have each and every year. We have all 60 over at internationalpodcastday.com/speakers. Again, great advocates and voices within the industry. They're volunteering all of their time. They're putting together a great broadcast and information for everybody. And you can just go see and feel the amount of passion and the amount of love that they have in the industry. And it's great. We highlight all the speakers, we put their country, we put their podcast, we really give them the platform. And this is an opportunity to highlight their voices and their messages. So yeah, I definitely encourage everybody to go over there and kind of give those speakers some love. Check out their shows. You, as Steve and I always say, whether you're listening to a podcast awards, you're surfing your podcast player, you're at some site, you're going to find a new podcast you're going to love. I guarantee it. And it may be on our site, it may be on someone else's site, but definitely get in there, kind of dive in, keep subscribing, and keep supporting the industry.
Well, we're excited. We're going to be listening on International Podcast Day because TehachaPod was nominated for Government Podcast of the Year. So we've got our fingers crossed. You know, maybe they'll call our name.
Yeah, that's right. We just got to beat those darn war veterans, those guys.
And Steve is a veteran of the Air Force, and we thank you for your service, sir. We really do appreciate that and what you've, done for our country and what you've done for this industry. So thank you very much. Thank you for the kind words that you shared. And also, I'm going to give you another shout out for bringing me on to my first podcast to co-host a couple of episodes of Tehachapi Mountain Voice with you. I really enjoyed that. I know those were fun. So thank you for that.
They were great times. It was kind of a stepping stone. I had plans with it, but you know how plans go. And to be real honest with you, it fits better within your organizational structure to be able to come up with the content. But I do remember one we did with somebody, I think it was about water, that lasted for about 6 hours. It was
yeah, sounds about right.
And I do remember that one. His first name was Seth, and he'd been on the Today Show. So he had already been interviewed by, the big NBC morning show, and, we got him a few weeks later. So I'm sure he fired his publicist after that. But. But anyway, guys, I just want to say thank you. We appreciate you taking the time. Congratulations on all the work, and International Podcast Day is definitely growing, and it's taking a life of its own. And it's the two of you that have pushed podcasting to where it is. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time. Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure. And hey, Corey, I always love your CSUB going to the big dance celebration voice.
Oh yeah,
your broadcast. I love it, man.
My giant yes scream. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to give you a little love. I know it's been 5 years since we've been there.
It has. I'll tell you though, that was like an out of body experience.
Exactly.
And the best part is when you see the highlight on ESPN, you see my big dumb face jumping in the air courtside. Like, you're not supposed to do that as a broadcaster, but I literally am in the air with my hands in the air. You don't get those moments very often or ever. Yeah. So I appreciate it.
Give you some love for that. I always appreciated that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good deal.
5 seconds. Basil off a screen. Basil. 2 seconds. Basil for the win. Yes! We're going to the NCAA tournament.
You're listening to TehachaPod with Key Budge and Corey Costello.
Corey, International Podcast Day. It's September 30th. We got a chance to help promote it, and it came from two Tehachapi guys.
Yeah, I'll be solidly listening to the live stream on September 30th proper. I won't be the 29th in the wee hours of the morning.
On the international date line somewhere in the South Pacific. But we can appreciate them kicking it off for us. That's the first inning of this 30-inning marathon.
Yeah, it's very cool. No, it's very cool. And then it started here, and just what the evolution of this sort of medium and how it's being used across like you said, there's a show for everything, literally.
Right.
And you can sort of pick on what you like to listen to, and it just kind of fits our on-demand lifestyle we now have.
Yeah. And for us, we're able to talk about a lot of different things that go on here in the city. So, right. I mean, we said there's these niche things, like when you said you were talking about NASCAR. Yeah. And it was all focused on NASCAR, and here we're able to talk about construction projects, and then International Podcast Day. What's the tie-in? It started and originates here in Tehachapi, which is super cool. We've got service organizations that are doing great work, other charitable organizations that we need to talk about, as well as the people's business and the day-to-day things that go on in our government agency.
And longer than you could in like a press release or even a public meeting or a public hearing and that kind of stuff. This allows more of that expanded discussion and details. And I mean, it's just was the original thought of all this. And this even goes back to the reason why podcasting has done what it's done over the last 15, 16 years, is because you're looking, originally this idea started as many moons ago was, maybe the city should have a radio station, right? That was the only way to do this, was to have a radio station. Well, those are expensive to start up. They're expensive to maintain. You've got all sorts of costs involved in that. And meanwhile, for a very, minimal fee now these days, with minimal investment, you can do a podcast and reach a bigger, if not, much larger audience outside of just your little listening area that your antenna is limited to.
I mean, absolutely. To be able to put this service up to reach all the people that we do. It's nominal. If you had a radio station, even a low power AM station, the electricity bill would be enormous.
The phone bill, because it actually takes a phone signal to go from your studio to your tower site. There's a phone line involved, and usually a high quality phone line.
And the dedicated hardware that would have to be there, the computers, the servers, it goes on. So what we're able to do on a budget to get information to the public, I hope that we're able to kind of convey that we found that people were leaving radio to come to podcasts.
Yeah.
So for me, this is pretty cool.
And now, like they mentioned in that conversation, you almost have to, even as a terrestrial radio host, you need to podcast your show when the day is over. You have to take your show and you have to cut the commercials out, and you have to get the meat and potatoes and put it in a podcast and put it up on your website, because people probably missed that hour, 2 hours you were on. So they want to get it in podcast. The best way to do it on demand. So it's kind of crazy how both mediums are using it these days.
Exactly right. And so we want to remind everyone, go to internationalpodcastday.com, and then also their tech podcast, The Waves of Tech, and you can find that wavesoftech.com, or you can go to whatever podcasting platform, same one you get TehachaPod from, and you can just search The Waves of Tech and it'll pop up.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
So coming up, we're going to be talking in an upcoming episode to the Saracoso Foundation, Community College Foundation, and they've got many satellite network little campuses in their network. And we've got some guests. The president of the foundation will be on, along with Lauren Falk, who is the program manager, and Lydia Cheney, who is on the board of directors.
Yeah, local business owner who's on the board of directors for Saracoso, who has a campus in Tehachapi, and it's their quickest growing campus outside of their main hub there in Ridgecrest. So,
and you having a background working at Cal State, you understand the importance of a foundation and the things that they can do. So, I mean, to kind of tease a little bit about what we're probably going to be talking about, what's the importance of having a foundation at a college level?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, there's certain things you can't use state funding for. Saracoso is part of the Kern Community College District with Bakersfield College and not Porterville, but Taft College, a few others that are in that district. And so you're allowed to use state funding, and obviously a lot of state funding, taxpayer dollars, goes to these colleges. But certain things you can't use taxpayer dollars for. And a lot of that comes to sometimes construction. The state has very limited, you can only use X amount for construction. They don't give you enough money for construction of new facilities and that kind of stuff. So the foundation helps set that up. Scholarships as well, big part of that. You can't use state funding for scholarships. So whether it's athletic or it's just academic, those scholarships have to be funded. A lot of your research as well. So there's certain things that just your taxpayer dollars are limited to. So foundations are they're so critical because you need to kind of get the funding secured, and at least get a piece of the funding secured for whatever it's a project or a building, that kind of stuff. So that's where the foundations come in.
It's going to be an interesting conversation, and then with the local portion, like you said, the fastest growing campus and their network is right here in Tehachapi. We've got Tehachapi members that are on the board of directors. Should be an interesting conversation that'll be coming up on the next TehachaPod, so we hope you join us for that. And again, if there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about, send us an email. Corey, Greg, and I would love to hear from you. media@TehachapiCityHall.com. And send us those ideas or comments, something that you like, don't like, whatever it is. We want to hear. We want that interaction with the community. media@TehachapiCityHall.com.
And if you don't like it, remember what we said earlier. This is on a budget, so you can.
And I'm very proud of what we do for how we save the taxpayer dollars to get the information out in a hopefully a very clear way that they can digest and choose to agree, disagree, or make whatever informed decision, a better informed decision.
And to tear down one of those other walls, we did, Greg Garrett, our city manager who usually joins us on the podcast, couldn't today. He's driving back from somewhere else, but he just sent me a text message saying he's listening to the podcast driving back. So not the one we're recording now, but he's listening to a previous episode as he's on his way back from... there's just one of those, mind-blowing.
That's right.
moments.
Not listening to terrestrial radio.
There you go.
TehachaPod is a conversation about Tehachapi designed for the people who live here or who would like to know more about this mountaintop community. If you have a question you would like answered, email media@TehachapiCityHall.com. We will try to answer it on a future episode of TehachaPod.